So Jordan Peele's Nope is the third film in his and it's basically his kind of like saga of horror. It's debatable. It's debatable if it's kind of horror. I mean, it may be leaning more towards like social horror with his other films like Get Out and Us. Nope, I think might actually be my favorite Jordan Peele film now. Just because I think everything about Nope is just bigger. Like for one, like it has a way bigger scope in terms of like the themes it's trying to touch on, as well as the setting that it's placed within. In addition to like the visual effects, like the visual effects here are far more grand than they've been in the previous films, and I feel like it kind of works here because like a lot of people like I love the marketing for Nope. Like they were very vague about what this film was going to be about. It's just like people looking up towards the sky. And a lot of people thought like, oh, it's going to be aliens. Then of course we got more posters and trailers, and it started to reveal, oh yeah, it's going to be an alien film. Now, thankfully, like at first, I was a little bit hesitant because like alien films, especially like alien horror films, tend to usually, they fall into like one of two paths, which is like, what do the aliens want from us? They want to they want to either eat us or they want to meet us. So either ET or Mars Attacks, that type of deal. And you could technically place Nope into this type of, into this little bit of a binary. You could actually choose one. That being said, it becomes, I love how the story becomes more than just, what are the aliens trying to do? Like there's a bigger theme here. And I think it works mostly because like, I mean, for one, like, the cast is amazing here. You have Daniel Kaluuya playing Otis Jr., or as he prefers to be called, OJ, and yes, they make a little winking joke about it. And OJ basically runs this Hollywood ranch. He's inherited this ranch from his father, who's run a ranch of horses that appear in like movies and television commercials. So he takes over the ranch, and the ranch is not doing well. He's trying to make it work, but he's struggling to just make a profit. Like he ends up selling a lot of horses, but he wants to buy them back because it's really important to his legacy. And Kaluuya is very like I mean like he always does this so well, but he has this very understated performance where like he can just make you smile just from like the smallest things with him. Like he has the ability to be both intimidating and comical with so little, which makes him such like a perfect actor. And I think he's definitely at his finest here. Like he's very he's very subdued, he's very quiet. He keeps very much to himself, even though he's in a business where he's really got to hustle a bit. So you would think that he'd get a little bit of backup from his sister who gets involved, Emerald, played by Keke Palmer, and she is just like the polar opposite of OJ. She's eccentric. She's very talkative. She's got a lot of energy, but she's also not as focused on the ranch as OJ is. So she's basically, like I said, the polar opposite, which makes them have the perfect chemistry. Like anytime they're together on screen, it's just wonderful to see their back and forth. The way that like M just wants to insert herself into every conversation, and OJ just kind of casually trying to push her back. They have a perfect dynamic there that even when it gets to the point where they actually see eye to eye and actually connect, it works so well because you just know like they're like that brother and sister who grew up just feuding with each other but would always come together when the chips are down. So they face their biggest challenge when the ranch starts having horses go missing, and they're not quite sure why it's happening until they start seeing something up in the sky. And they're not quite sure what it is, but it's hiding behind clouds, and it's sucking up the horses. Now, eventually, I'm not sure how much of a spoiler it would be at this point, but they eventually discover a little bit more about this UFO that's basically stalking their ranch. But they realize that, there's... Okay, so they figure out that there's a UFO on their ranch. What do they want to do with it? The number one thing that M wants to do is she wants to get footage of it. And not just any footage, but like the perfect footage, not that kind of like blurry and like the intentional shaky cam stuff that they throw up on YouTube. She wants to find that perfect shot, and this becomes part of like the general theme of the film, is this focus on the eyeballs, and this was kind of a little bit of like a focus in like in the previous film Us, where you had like a bit of those like dioptic shots where they were like really close in the eyes. but this film, much like Get Out and Us, like it always feels like there's a moment in Jordan Peele's films where they perfectly identify who the antagonist is and what they want and what they represent. It's kind of like how Nicholas Winding Refn once said that there's always that one scene that defines what a film is about. So for like in Get Out, I would say that scene would probably be where Stephen Root's character basically says that he wants, what black people have and doesn't really care how they get it. So basically, yeah, like they assure you right from that scene that, yeah, this is a commentary on systemic racism. And then you get into a film like Us, where like they have that very blatant moment where they ask like the doppelgangers, who are you, and they say we're Americans, and it becomes obvious then. There's a scene in Nope where they basically identify the UFO as the viewer, and this got me really intrigued because with Get Out and Nope, once you get to those scenes, it becomes pretty obvious like what the film is trying to say. But when you get to the scene where they identify the UFO as the viewer, which becomes like much more literal as a representation of a camera, the closer and closer they get to this alien, it becomes far more fascinating to explore. And it's even more interesting when you get the other characters involved here. Like you have Stephen Yeun playing this ridiculous child actor growing up called Ricky, who they established worked on like a sitcom called Gordy that involved I believe it's like a chimpanzee they had on the set, and the animals just went nuts and killed a bunch of people. And because they weren't able to maintain it, he basically grew up with this trauma. But Ricky is also aware of the UFO and tries to reason with it in the same way that it reasons with Gordy. So you have like this more interesting element, I think, of like this overlapping theme of control as well. So it's all a matter of like, who is in control here and who is the viewer. And the UFO kind of basically wants both. It wants to be entertained. It wants, basically it wants blood. It's kind of like a much more subtle commentary on horror films in the same way that Cabin in the Woods was. Like, Cabin in the Woods was very much a bit of like an on-the-nose satire, or maybe a little bit of a roast if you want to think of it that way, of the desires of the horror audience and even horror producers. And the UFO actually functions the same way, but in a much more subtle way. Which makes for the perfect timing of like the catchphrase of the film. Like, if you were hoping that there was a scene in the film where Daniel Kaluuya's character basically looks up at the UFO and basically says, "No, I'm not playing this game," that happens in there. And there's a perfect moment here where it's just like nothing happens here, and it's meant to be both. It's tense and comical at the same time, because for one thing, it's a smart move that he's doing, and at the same time, it's hilarious because you're seeing this character actually show some smarts within a horror situation. Because typically, when you're watching a horror film like this, you want characters to make stupid decisions. You might think you don't, but you do. You want to have that moment where like there is terror and horror and blood and guts on the screen, and that usually happens if a character makes a mistake. And these characters are trying not to make mistakes, but they're also dealing with a threat that they don't quite know how to deal with. Specifically, like they just want like a shot of it. Like they want, like I said, they want the perfect shot. Destruction of the UFO will come later. But you have just like an amazing cast who contributes here as well. Like there's a few more characters here. You have Brandon Perea, I think I'm pronouncing it right. He plays Angel, who is a Fry's employee, who basically has nothing going on. He obsesses over ancient aliens, so he kind of becomes like the not like he's a little bit of the tech geek, but more of like the alien conspiracist. You know this type of character, and Brandon could have just played this like just very simple, because like he's supposed to be like a bit of like the not too smart comic relief, like the character who thinks he knows everything but kind of doesn't. Like he might know too much of something not important for this type of scenario. But he works here. Like he's pretty adorable in the way that he wants to like insert himself, and the way that both like OJ and M keep trying to like push him out of the scene. Like, yes, everything's set up. We don't need you anymore. It's like, oh, you guys sure? And you kind of feel for him a little bit because like it's a smart move. You don't want to get him too involved because he's going to get really nutty about it. But then you also have Michael Wincott playing this cinematographer who takes an interest in it as well. And just Wincott has like the most sultry, amazing voice that anytime he's on screen, or even just like one of the bigger scenes he has is over the phone, and just hearing his voice, just any scene with him is just a treat for the ears. And I haven't mentioned it because he's not in the film as much, but you also have Keith David playing OJ's father, which, I mean, do I have to say anything? Keith David is always fun to see. He always is. Like he doesn't quite have as deep a voice as Wincott, but he's got that remarkable voice that you just always love to see. So just everything about the way that the film is shot, and especially the slow build that it has to it. Like, there isn't, like, a mad dash for, like, the horror here. In fact, you don't really see any, like, terrifying, like, blood and guts or, like, you know, shocking horror until maybe, like, 2/3 of the way through the film. Now, that might sound like a long time, like, and to be fair, you do actually see a little bit more. You do see some death before that in the form of like mysterious happenings that go on in the sky. But once you get to that moment where you actually see the UFO and its innards, and it's claustrophobic and it's terrifying. Like, it was genuinely nightmarish. Like, I see tons of horror films, and you know, like, and there is stuff that kind of like scares me in a little bit of a small level, but with Nope, the moment they get to the innards of the UFO, it's just it gave me nightmares. It really did. It is, and I think for that reason alone, it's definitely Peele's most terrifying film for how slowly it builds up to that moment. But while you're building up to that moment, you have these amazing desert shots that are just perfectly shot here, that are just gorgeous to look at, just like the scope and depth and how they use it, especially during the climax where they use motorcycles and different tech and those wacky waving inflatable tube arm deals. The way they use them across this vast landscape is just beautiful. The commentary here, I think, is much more subtle than Peele's other films, and I think that works really well because it feels like there's a lot to say in this film, and it never has quite as blunt a moment. Like you can tell a little bit early on, especially from the opening credits, that it's definitely going to have something to do with cameras and the viewer. But it actually explores like quite a bit more than I would thought, and doesn't hold your hand as much. Like, it's very, especially with Kaluuya's performance, it's very like subdued and kind of like slowly builds up to that. And I think extra credit needs to be given here to Hoyt van Hoytema, the cinematographer, who just makes this film look beautiful. Just gorgeous, amazing big shots. We saw this in IMAX, where there was so much IMAX footage in here, and it looks immaculate and gorgeous. There's a little bit of like a nod to IMAX in the climax as well. But I think the other important thing to mention here too is that Peele, much like Get Out and Us, he has this amazing ability to just bring up humor when it feels appropriate and just kind of like ease it into like the narrative. It's very much like much more subdued than it was like with Us. There was a lot of humor in it. And with Nope, they're actually like it's got a decent flow. Like, it finds just the right moments to have little tongue-in-cheek humor here and there. That really works. And I think it also helps that it's more ambitious because it feels like a blending of genres here. Like, it's not just a horror film or a sci-fi film, but it's also got this Western angle, especially when you get to the climax, when you have OJ riding a horse and you have like the soundtrack swelling, and you have like this, especially when you have like this kind of like Western theme park off to the side here that plays a role in the climax as well. It works really well for that as well. And seeing well a lot, even though, which incidentally enough, well actually plays a pretty big part in this narrative. There's also fun little nods to other films, like I can't rightly say I've never seen like a perfect recreation of like the Akira motorcycle slide in live action. Like, you've seen it in animation tons of times, but they do a little nod to it in Nope. And I know a lot of people are tired of that Akira reference, which, if you don't know from the movie Akira, there's like that scene where Kaneda just finishes with like this chicken fight and just like skids, and you know the shot, you've seen it a million times. But it's still brought a smile to my face just to have that little nod there. So with all that considered, I mean, like I'd have to rewatch this film just to get a better sense of it, just because I feel like it did have a lasting effect on me, especially when you learn more about the UFO and especially with like the greater themes of control and the demands of the viewer. But with all things considered, right now, I think this is my favorite Jordan Peele film. It's I mean I've really loved Us and Get Out, but I dare say, and I think I don't want to make it sound just like because I like the fact that it's bigger. In terms of like how it was shot, definitely they had a huger budget for this. If not based on the cinematography, then definitely based on the special effects they used for the UFO. But just like with all things considered, with the thematic elements and the character dynamics, I think Nope is definitely my favorite Peele film.